The gun was already pressed against Benjamin Cooper's chest when Augusta Hawthorne made her decision. She stood in the doorway of the Silver Creek Saloon, her dark hair wild from riding hard through the Arizona dust, her chest heaving, her eyes locked on the man she had spent the last 3 months trying desperately not to love. The man holding the gun was Harlan Voss, and the expression on his weathered face was not fury. It was satisfaction. The kind that came from a man who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. "I told you, Miss Hawthorne," Harlan said, his voice carrying across the dead silence of the saloon, every card player, every bartender, every painted woman on the stairs frozen where they stood. "I told you that any man who helped you would pay for it." Augusta took a step forward. Her boot heel struck the floorboard and the sound cracked through the room like a shot. "Harlan, you put that gun down." "Or what?" He smiled. It was the smile of a man who believed he had already won. "You will shoot me." "You do not have the nerve, Augusta. You never did. That is why your father signed the deed over to me without a fight, and that is why you rode all the way out to this dusty nothing town asking a stranger for help instead of facing me yourself." Benjamin Cooper had not moved. He stood with his back straight and his jaw set, the barrel of Harlan's pistol pressed flat against his sternum, and his pale gray eyes were not on the gun or on Harlan. They were on Augusta. There was something in his expression she had never seen on a man's face before, not directed at her. It was not fear. It was not resignation. It was trust. Pure, absolute, devastatingly simple trust. As if whatever she chose to do in the next 10 seconds, he had already decided it would be the right thing. That trust nearly undid her completely. She had not come here for this. She had not come here to care about anyone. She had come to Silver Creek 6 weeks ago with a single purpose: find someone who knew the land, knew the law, and knew how to fight Harlan Voss's kind of corruption without getting killed. She had found Benjamin Cooper. And somewhere between the first argument they had in the street outside the land office and the night he had stayed up until dawn helping her read through 20 years of fraudulent property deeds by lamplight, she had made the catastrophic mistake of falling in love with him. She took another step forward. "Augusta, do not," Benjamin said quietly. Not pleading, just stating a fact the way he always stated facts, like the world was something that could be reasoned with if you spoke to it plainly enough. Harlan pressed the gun harder. "Last chance, Cooper. Ride out of Silver Creek tonight and do not come back. Walk away from whatever arrangement you made with this woman. Do that and you live." The silence stretched. Augusta reached into the folds of her riding coat and pulled out not a weapon but a document, a thick sheaf of papers tied with a strip of leather. She held it up so Harlan could see it clearly. "This is over, Harlan," she said. "It was over the moment I found what you buried." And the expression on Harlan Voss's face finally cracked. Augusta Hawthorne had arrived in Silver Creek, Arizona Territory on the 14th of March, 1879, on the afternoon stage from Tucson, with nothing but a carpetbag, a box of documents, and a fury so clean and cold it had kept her warm through 3 days of brutal travel. She was 24 years old. She had grown up on the Hawthorne Ranch outside Prescott, which her grandfather had built with his own hands, and her father had expanded over 30 years into one of the most productive cattle operations in the territory. She knew how to ride. She knew how to keep accounts. She knew how to doctor a sick calf and barter for feed and read a weather sky and manage a crew of ranch hands who had, for the most part, respected her, because she had never once asked for respect she had not earned. What she had not known, until 3 months ago, was that her father had a gambling problem that had been quietly destroying him for a decade. She had not known because he had hidden it with the particular skill of a man who was ashamed of himself. She had not known because she had been away in Tucson for 2 years helping her aunt recover from an illness, managing her aunt's small household, sending money home when she could, and trusting that the ranch was running as it always had. She had not known because her father, Edward Hawthorne, was a proud man, and proud men have a terrible habit of letting their disasters grow in the dark rather than expose them to the light. By the time Augusta came home, The disaster had a name: Harlan Voss. Harlan was a land speculator and money lender who had arrived in the Prescott area 4 years prior with a reputation that preceded him from New Mexico and Texas like a bad smell. He lent money to desperate men at rates that bordered on extortion, and when those men could not pay, he accepted land. He had accumulated title to 11 properties in the territory through this method. Edward Hawthorne's ranch was now the 12th. Augusta had arrived home to find her father a hollowed-out version of himself, the ranch hands gone, the cattle sold off at ruinous prices to cover debts she had not known existed, and a legal notice of land transfer already filed with the Territorial Land Office in Prescott. Harlan Voss had been patient and methodical and completely legal on the surface of it, and when Augusta had gone to the land office herself and demanded to see the documents, the clerk had smiled at her with the particular patronizing sympathy that she had been receiving from men her entire life, and told her that everything was in perfect order. It was not in perfect order. Augusta knew it was not, because she had grown up watching her father manage that ranch with obsessive care, and there were numbers in those documents that did not match anything she knew about the property's actual value or the original loan amounts. There were signatures that looked rushed and dates that did not align. There was something wrong, and she was going to find out what it was. The problem was that finding out what was wrong required access to records and legal knowledge she did not have, and doing it alone in Prescott while Harlan Voss watched her every move was impossible. She needed distance. She needed help. She needed someone who was outside Harlan's sphere of influence, which in Prescott meant she needed to go somewhere else entirely. A woman named Cecily Drummond, who ran the boarding house in Prescott and had known Augusta since childhood, had mentioned a name: Benjamin Cooper. She said he had come through Prescott 2 years back when he was working as a surveyor's assistant, and he had spotted a fraudulent boundary claim that had saved the Drummond family from losing their water rights. She said he was quiet and difficult and sometimes maddening to deal with, but that he was honest in a way that was almost uncomfortable, and that he had a particular gift for finding the hidden lie inside a legal document. She said he was currently working out of Silver Creek, 60 miles east, running a small land survey operation. Augusta had written him a letter. He had written back 2 weeks later, a letter so brief it had almost offended her, 3 sentences saying that if she could get herself to Silver Creek and bring the documents she had access to, he would look at them. No promises, no pleasantries, just the door cracked open. She had gone. The stage from Tucson deposited her in Silver Creek's single main street at 3:30 in the afternoon. Silver Creek was a mining town trying to become something more than a mining town, which meant it had the usual saloon and the usual jail and the usual general store, and also a modest land office attached to a surveyor's operation in a 2-room building at the end of the street. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "B. Cooper, Land Survey and Records." She pushed the door open without knocking. The man inside was bent over a large drafting table, working on what appeared to be a property map with the focused intensity of someone who had forgotten the rest of the world existed. He was lean and broad-shouldered, somewhere in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and hands stained with ink up to the second knuckle. He wore no hat indoors, which struck her as a small and inexplicable point in his favor. He did not look up. "If you are here about the Mendoza survey, I already sent word that it will be ready Thursday." "I am not here about the Mendoza survey," Augusta said. He looked up then. His eyes were a very pale gray, almost silver in the afternoon light from the window, and they assessed her with the same direct precision she imagined he applied to property maps. Not rude. Just completely unadorned with the social performance most men offered women they had just met. "Augusta Hawthorne," he said. "Benjamin Cooper," she replied. They looked at each other for a moment. "Your letter said you had documents," he said. She set the carpetbag on his drafting table and pulled out the box. He looked at the box, then at her, and there was the faintest shift in his expression, something that might have been the beginning of a very restrained form of respect. "Sit down," he said. "I will get more lamp oil. This is going to take a while." It took 4 days. Benjamin Cooper was, as Cecily Drummond had promised, both quiet and sometimes maddening. He did not make small talk. He did not offer reassurances. When Augusta asked him what he thought after the first day of going through the documents, he said only that he needed to see more before he had a useful opinion, which she found deeply unsatisfying. She had expected someone who would share her outrage, who would immediately confirm what her instincts were telling her. Instead, she got a man who set each page aside with methodical care and said nothing until he had something to say. She stayed at the Silver Creek boarding house, run by a woman named Mrs. Parson who fed her enormous breakfasts and asked no questions, which Augusta appreciated. She walked to Benjamin's office each morning at 8 and they worked until well past dark. He made coffee that was strong enough to strip the finish off a floor and offered her none for the first 2 days, apparently not considering that she might want any, until she finally reached over and poured herself a cup without asking, and he looked at her with that unreadable expression, and then, very quietly, almost imperceptibly, his mouth curved. "Help yourself," he said. "I already did," she said. That was, she would later think, the moment things began to shift between them, though she did not recognize it at the time as anything other than a minor assertion of her own personhood in the face of his obliviousness. On the evening of the 4th day, Benjamin straightened up from the drafting table, put down his pen, and said, "There are 2 fraudulent entries in the loan documents, possibly 3, and the property assessment used to justify the loan amount was conducted by a man named Terence Alcott." Augusta felt the blood rise in her face. She knew that name. "Alcott works for Harlan Voss," she said. "He did in 1876, yes. I verified it this afternoon. He submitted an assessment that undervalued your father's property by nearly 40%, which allowed Voss to claim the loan-to-value ratio justified a higher interest rate, which in turn created a debt spiral your father could never realistically escape." He paused. "It was designed to fail, from the beginning." The room was very quiet. The lamp between them flickered. "Can we prove it?" Augusta asked. "We can prove the assessment was conducted by a man in Voss's employ without disclosure. That alone is enough to challenge the validity of the original loan contract." He looked at her steadily. "But it will require a territorial court filing, and Voss has connections in Prescott. Once we file, he will know, and men like Voss do not respond to legal challenges by waiting quietly for court dates." "I know what kind of man Harlan Voss is," Augusta said. "I know you do," Benjamin said. "I am asking whether you understand what I am telling you. This will not be simply a matter of paperwork. There will be consequences. Are you trying to warn me off?" He looked at her across the lamplight, and for the first time since she had arrived in Silver Creek, she felt as if he was actually seeing her rather than merely processing the information she represented. "No," he said. "I am asking if you are ready for what comes next, because if you are, then I am with you." Augusta had not expected that, the plain simplicity of it, the absence of conditions or negotiations or the tired suggestion that perhaps she should leave this to someone more capable of handling it. Just, "If you are ready, I am with you." She swallowed past something that had risen unexpectedly in her throat. "I am ready," she said. "Good," he said, and he picked up his pen again. "Let me show you what we need to find." What they needed to find was the original property assessment from before Alcott's fraudulent one, which should have been on file with the Territorial Land Office in Prescott, but had apparently been removed. Benjamin suspected, based on his experience with similar cases, that Voss had either had it destroyed or had it tucked away somewhere as insurance against the day someone came looking for it. The question was where. "He would keep it somewhere he controlled," Augusta said. They had moved from the office to the small table in the back room where Benjamin apparently ate his meals, surrounded by stacks of survey records. It was past 10 at night, and she had taken off her riding jacket and rolled up her sleeves, and she was no longer trying to maintain the formal distance that she had arrived with. Not a bank, not a land office, somewhere personal. "He has property here in Silver Creek," Benjamin said. He had a map spread on the table and he was marking it with a pencil. "He bought a parcel 18 months ago on the east side of town, supposedly for a mining venture, but there is no mine." Augusta looked at the map. The marked parcel was adjacent to the main stage road. "A way station," she said. Benjamin looked up. "What?" "He has a way station out there. I heard him mention it once years ago when he came to look at our land. He said he had set up a way station on the eastern road as a rest stop for his men. I thought nothing of it at the time." She met Benjamin's eyes. "But a way station has storage, a lockbox. Somewhere a careful man would keep things he wanted accessible but not public." Benjamin was quiet for a moment. "That would require someone to go out there." "Yes," she said. "That would require someone to go out there without Voss knowing, and to get inside the storage without authorization. Also, yes. That is called breaking and entering, Miss Hawthorne. That is called recovering a stolen document that is rightfully the property of my family," she said. "But if the legal terminology makes you uncomfortable, I am happy to go alone." He put down his pencil. "You are not going alone. Then stop calling it breaking and entering and let us plan." Another of those almost invisible shifts in his expression. She was beginning to learn to read them, the tiny calibrations of a face that had learned to be very careful about what it showed. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly. "This is not about legal strategy anymore. If Voss finds out we have been to that way station, he will not pursue this through the courts. He will pursue it through other means. I know. Do you have anyone? Anyone who knows you are here, who would raise an alarm if something happened to you?" The question was practical, not sentimental, but it landed somewhere unexpected in her chest. Because the honest answer was no. Her father was in no state to help anyone. She had no brothers, no cousins within reach, no husband. She had come here alone because she had been alone in this fight since the beginning. "I have you," she said. And then, because it came out sounding more vulnerable than she intended, she added, "And I have 30 years of Hawthorne stubbornness." Something changed in his face then. Not dramatically, not with any of the theatrical emotion she had seen on other men's faces when they thought they were being charming or gallant. Something much quieter and more permanent than that. "Right," he said. "Let us plan." They went to the way station 2 nights later, on horseback in the dark, taking a path Benjamin knew from his survey work that avoided the main road. The night was cold and clear, the Arizona sky enormous above them, the kind of sky that made a person feel simultaneously very small and very awake. They did not speak much on the ride. Augusta was focused and nervous, and she would not have admitted the nervous part to Benjamin Cooper if someone had paid her. He rode beside her with the steady, unhurried manner that she was coming to recognize as simply the way he moved through the world, as if he had made a permanent peace with whatever came next, and was therefore not troubled by not knowing what it was. The way station was a low building set back from the road, with a small corral and a water trough. It was dark and apparently unoccupied. They left the horses at a distance and went the rest of the way on foot. "There," Benjamin said softly, indicating a side door with a padlock. He produced a set of tools from his coat pocket that she decided not to ask too many questions about, and within 4 minutes the padlock was open. Inside was exactly what Augusta had guessed: storage. Crates and barrels and a heavy wooden trunk in the back corner with a lock that took Benjamin 6 minutes and required Augusta holding the lamp and whispering directions she only partially made up. Inside the trunk were 3 things: a ledger, a bundle of letters, and a folded document that, when Augusta opened it with hands that were not entirely steady, turned out to be a property assessment for the Hawthorne Ranch dated April 1874, signed by a licensed independent assessor named James Whitmore, valuing the property at $22,000, which was more than double what Alcott's fraudulent assessment had claimed. Augusta stared at it in the lamplight for a long moment. She had known, logically, that she was right. She had been operating on the certainty of it for months. But there is a difference between knowing you are right and holding the proof of it in your hands, and the difference hit her somewhere behind the sternum with a force she was not prepared for. "That is it," Benjamin said. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "Augusta." He said her name for the first time without the miss, quietly, and she looked up. He was watching her with that careful, unadorned attention of his, the lamplight between them, and he said, "We have it. It is going to be all right." She had spent 3 months being strong and certain and angry and self-sufficient, and those were not bad things to be, but they were also, as it turned out, exhausting. The simple sincerity of those 6 words, delivered by a man who did not say things he did not mean, undid something in her that had been wound very tight for a very long time. She did not cry. She was not the crying sort, particularly. But she took a breath that was slightly longer and deeper than usual, and then she folded the document carefully and put it inside her coat, close to her body, and said, "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," he said. "We still have to get out of here without being seen, and then we have to get this filed before Voss finds out we have it." "I know," she said, "but still." They looked at each other in the lamplight for a moment that lasted just slightly too long to be entirely about property documents. Then they both, by mutual unspoken agreement, turned and got back to business. They got out without incident. They were back in Silver Creek before midnight. Benjamin locked the document in his own safe, which was built into the floor under a section of removable floorboard that he showed her with the particular satisfaction of a man who had installed something useful. The next morning, Augusta sent a telegram to a territorial judge in Tucson whose name Benjamin had given her, a man with a reputation for taking on land fraud cases. The judge's name was Hendricks, and he was, according to Benjamin, something genuinely rare in the Arizona Territory of 1879, a man in a position of authority who could not be bought. Judge Hendricks replied within 24 hours. He wanted the documents. He was willing to review the case on an expedited basis. He would be in Silver Creek in 6 days. Augusta should have felt relieved, and she did in part. But she also knew that 6 days was a long time when a man like Harlan Voss was watching. And she knew, from the way Benjamin had become quieter and more watchful over the past 2 days, that he knew it too. She found out how Voss had learned about the way station 4 days later, when a man she did not recognize came into Benjamin's office while she was there, and told Benjamin that Thomas Greer, one of Benjamin's survey assistants, had been seen at Voss's Silver Creek operation the previous evening. Thomas Greer had been with Benjamin for 2 years. He had helped file the maps. He had known where the way station document search was heading. Augusta watched Benjamin's face absorb this information. She watched him process it with the measured, contained reaction of a man who had learned not to show his wounds in public. When the messenger left, the silence in the office was different from the comfortable silences that had grown up between them over the preceding weeks. "How much does he know?" she asked. "Enough," Benjamin said. "He knows we have something. He knows we are planning to file with the court." He paused. "He may know about Judge Hendricks. 2 more days." "Yes." "Then we keep the documents safe, stay visible enough that any move against us becomes public, and wait for the judge." He looked at her. "You are very calm." "I am not calm at all," she said. "I am terrified." But I have found that terrified and calm look very similar from the outside if you practice. Something happened in his face then, something warmer and more unguarded than anything she had seen from him yet, and for a moment she thought he might say something that had nothing to do with the case. But then the door opened and Mrs. Parson appeared to tell Augusta that a man named Lowell, who claimed to work for Harlan Voss, had been asking around the boarding house about her. They moved the documents that afternoon. Benjamin wrapped them in oilcloth and Augusta rode out alone to a location they chose together, a hollowed-out tree stump near a creek bend 3 miles east of town that Benjamin had marked on his personal survey map and she buried them there. She came back covered in creek mud, and Benjamin, who was watching for her from the office window, came to the door and looked at her and said nothing for a moment. "They are safe," she said. "I know," he said. "I was watching for you, not the documents." She stopped on the step. The afternoon light was going golden and long behind her, and the street of Silver Creek was doing its late afternoon business around them, horses and shopkeepers and the distant piano from the saloon. And Augusta looked at Benjamin Cooper in the doorway of his small office and felt the full weight of what had been building between them settle over her like something that had always been there but had only just made itself known. "Benjamin," she said. "Augusta," he said. Then Lowell walked around the corner with two other men, and the moment dissolved into something considerably more urgent. Lowell was a big man with a flat face and the confident walk of someone who was used to making problems go away through the simple application of his physical presence. He stopped in the street in front of Benjamin's office and looked at them both. "Mr. Voss sends his regards," Lowell said. "He wants to extend an invitation to Miss Hawthorne to reconsider her current course of action." "Tell Mr. Voss to send his invitations to the territorial court," Augusta said. Lowell's flat expression did not change. "Mr. Voss is a patient man, Miss Hawthorne. He has been patient for a long time. He would prefer to resolve this quietly." "Then he should not have built his fortune on stolen land," Augusta said. There was a moment of absolute stillness. Then Lowell looked at Benjamin. "Mr. Cooper, you are a man who has made a life in this territory," Lowell said. "A business, a reputation. It would be a shame to see that disturbed." "Would it?" Benjamin said. "It was not a question. Mr. Voss is willing to be generous to men who understand the situation correctly." "I understand the situation correctly," Benjamin said. "The situation is that Harlan Voss committed land fraud against the Hawthorne family, and in 2 days a territorial judge is going to review the evidence. I suggest you tell Mr. Voss to retain a lawyer." Lowell looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away with his two companions, and the three of them disappeared down the street as quietly as they had come. Augusta let out a breath. "Well," she said. "Yes," Benjamin said. "We should probably not stand in the street anymore." "Agreed." They went inside. Benjamin locked the office door and then leaned against his drafting table and looked at her. His pale gray eyes were very serious, but also, underneath that, something she was beginning to recognize, a kind of contained and stubborn warmth that he kept buttoned up most of the time like a coat against cold weather. "I want you to know something," he said. She waited. "Whatever happens in the next 2 days, I want you to know that I am not helping you because of the professional interest or because it is the right legal course of action, though both of those things are true." He paused, as if he was choosing words with the same precision he applied to survey measurements. "I am in this because of you. Because you walked into this office, and you were the most fiercely determined person I have ever met, and you did not ask me to believe in you. You just showed me the evidence and expected me to draw my own conclusions. And I did. And the conclusion I drew was that I would not step away from this. Not for Thomas Greer's betrayal or Lowell's implied threats or anything else." He stopped. "I wanted you to know that." Augusta had not moved. Her hands were very still at her sides. "Benjamin Cooper," she said, and her voice was not entirely as steady as she wanted it to be. "If you say something like that to a woman and then immediately go back to talking about property maps, I am going to be very put out with you." The warmth broke through his expression all the way then. Not a grin, nothing so uncomplicated as a grin, but something genuine and a little helpless that he apparently could not button up this time. "I am not going to go back to talking about property maps immediately," he said. "Good," she said. He crossed the space between them in 2 steps, and she met him halfway, and the first time he kissed her was there in his small survey office in Silver Creek, with the late afternoon light coming sideways through the window and the sound of the territorial frontier going on outside. And it was not tentative or polite, or any of the things that Augusta had always associated with first kisses, which had, in her limited experience, been mostly clumsy and somewhat disappointing. It was instead the kiss of a man who had spent several weeks convincing himself not to and had finally simply stopped convincing. She kissed him back with considerable enthusiasm, which she felt was fair. They stood apart eventually, both of them somewhat altered in expression. "That was not planned," Benjamin said. "I noticed," she said. "I did not mind." "Good," he said. And then, because he was Benjamin Cooper and he was constitutionally incapable of prolonged emotional exposure without returning to the practical, "We should prepare for tomorrow." "Yes," she agreed. "We should." She reached out and straightened the collar of his shirt, which had gotten slightly displaced, and he went very still in the way she was learning meant he was feeling something he was not quite sure what to do with. "But Benjamin, when this is over, we are going to have a conversation about what just happened that is not immediately interrupted by property law." "Agreed," he said. It was the next evening, while they were waiting for Judge Hendricks to arrive the following morning, that everything came apart. A boy from the boarding house came running to the office with a message. Benjamin was wanted at the Silver Creek Saloon. Urgent. The message was from a man named Carver who Benjamin knew slightly as a former mining surveyor, a man with no obvious connection to Voss. Augusta's instincts screamed. "It is a trap," she said. "Probably," Benjamin said. "Then we do not go. If I do not go and Carver actually has something, we lose it." He was already pulling on his coat. "More likely you are right, and it is Voss's way of getting me somewhere public where the consequences look accidental." "Then you absolutely do not go." "If I do not go and Voss decides the direct approach is more efficient, he comes here." He looked at her. "I would rather it be somewhere public. I am coming with you, Augusta." "I am coming with you," she said again, in the tone that he had learned over the past several weeks was not the beginning of a negotiation. They went to the saloon together. The Silver Creek Saloon was moderately full for a Wednesday evening. They came through the door and Augusta scanned the room in the same moment that she saw Harlan Voss himself, standing at the far end of the bar, and behind him, with his hand on a pistol and the satisfied expression of a man who had timed this perfectly, was someone she recognized from Prescott as one of Voss's most trusted men. And in the center of the room, with a gun pressed against his chest and Harlan Voss's hand on the barrel, was Benjamin. No. That was the sequence she would replay later, trying to understand how it had moved so fast. The sequence was door, saloon, Voss at the bar, and then Benjamin suddenly in the center, and then the gun, all in the space of time it took to draw a single breath. Voss had positioned men she had not seen, and the moment they entered, those men had moved. This was where the story had begun. With Augusta in the doorway and the gun against Benjamin's chest, and Harlan Voss looking at her with the expression of a man who believed he had already won. Augusta held up the thick sheaf of papers and said, "This is over, Harlan. It was over the moment I found what you buried." Harlan Voss looked at the papers. His face did not lose its composure entirely, but something shifted in his eyes, a quick recalculation, the look of a man whose plan has just encountered a variable he did not account for. "Those are copies," he said. "The originals are mine. The originals are under a tree stump 3 miles east of town, already wrapped in oilcloth and registered by location with a sworn affidavit I sent to Judge Hendricks this morning, along with a full account of this document's existence and where it came from." Augusta took another step into the room. "So yes, Harlan, those are copies. I had them made by the clerk at the Silver Creek Land Office this afternoon. But Judge Hendricks has the full picture in his hands tonight in Tucson, and he arrives here tomorrow at 9 in the morning. You can kill both of us if you like, but you will not be killing the case. The case already exists." The silence in the saloon was absolute. Every person in the room was perfectly still, and Augusta was aware of them in the way one becomes aware of an audience, the collective held breath of people watching something that would be talked about for a long time. Harlan Voss lowered the gun. He did it slowly, the way a man lowers himself into a chair when his legs have given out, not a graceful or voluntary movement, but one he had been forced into by the weight of his own gravity. He lowered it and he stepped back, and Benjamin Cooper moved immediately, not toward Augusta but to one side out of the direct line, because he was a man who understood tactical positioning, and he was not going to stand there like a post while the situation resolved. "This is not finished," Voss said. "It is finished enough for tonight," Augusta said, "and tomorrow morning it will be finished entirely." Voss looked at her for a long moment with the particular look of a man who is revising his understanding of a person he has fundamentally underestimated. Then he picked up his glass from the bar, finished his drink, set it down, and walked out of the saloon with the methodical dignity of a man, pretending he was leaving by choice. His men went with him. The saloon let out a breath. Augusta's legs, which had been performing admirably under the circumstances, chose this moment to remind her that they were made of actual flesh and bone, and were subject to adrenaline and the subsequent lack of it. She put her hand on the nearest table and breathed. Benjamin was beside her in the time it took to blink. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said. "I sent the affidavit this morning. Everything I said was true." "I know it is. I mean, are you all right?" She looked at him. His gray eyes were very close and very steady, and his hand had come up to her arm with a steadiness that steadied her in turn. "You trusted me," she said. "With the gun on you, you just looked at me and trusted me to handle it." "I did," he said simply. "That was foolish," she said. "Possibly," he said, "but you handled it." She had no response to that. That was not going to make her look dangerously close to a feeling she had been telling herself for weeks was inconvenient and poorly timed. So instead she straightened up and removed her hand from the table and said, "We need to be at the land office before 8 tomorrow morning to ensure everything is in order before Judge Hendricks arrives." "Yes," he said. His hand was still on her arm. "Benjamin." "Yes. You can let go of my arm. I am not going to fall over." "I know," he said. He did not let go. She looked at him for a moment. Then she covered his hand with hers and held on. Judge Hendricks arrived at 20 minutes past 9 the following morning on the Tucson stage, which was late by the usual margin of 20 minutes because the stage was always late. He was a compact, dry-voiced man of about 55 with the kind of face that had seen a great deal and been changed by very little of it, and he reviewed the documents Augusta and Benjamin presented to him in the Silver Creek land office with the efficiency of a man who had seen precisely this kind of fraud before and had no patience for the people who perpetrated it. Augusta had not slept. She had spent the night at the boarding house going over every piece of documentation one final time, making sure every date aligned, and every name was spelled correctly, and every exhibit was in the right order, and she had done it with the particular furious focus that fear transforms into when a person refuses to let it become paralysis. At 6 in the morning, she had made a terrible cup of coffee on Mrs. Parsons' stove and sat at the kitchen table and thought about her father, who was in Prescott right now in whatever diminished state he had found for himself. And she had thought about the ranch that her grandfather had built, and the land that her father had grown up on, and the land she had grown up on, and the land that Harlan Voss had taken through a scheme designed from the beginning to steal it. She had thought about Benjamin Cooper saying, "I am with you," and she had thought about the look on his face with the gun against his chest, the pure trust of it, and she had thought, not for the first time, that whatever came next for her in terms of the ranch and the family legacy, and all the things she had ridden out here to recover, she was also, without any prior planning or intention, in possession of something else she had not expected to find. Benjamin arrived at 7:30 with 2 cups of coffee from the saloon's morning service, which was better than anything a boarding house stove could produce. He set one in front of her without comment. She drank it without comment. They went over the documents together for the last time in a silence that was comfortable and purposeful and threaded through with something neither of them was saying yet, but both of them were entirely aware of. Judge Hendricks reviewed everything. He asked precise questions. Benjamin answered them with the same measured precision he applied to everything, and Augusta answered the questions about her family history and her father's circumstances, and the timeline of the fraud with a steadiness that cost her something, but she paid it willingly. At 11:45, Judge Hendricks looked up from the last document. "The original loan contract is void," he said. "The assessment it was based on was conducted by a party with an undisclosed conflict of interest, and the concealment of the legitimate assessment constitutes fraud. The property transfer is invalid." He picked up his pen. "I am issuing an order to the Territorial Land Office in Prescott to restore the Hawthorne Ranch deed to the name of Edward Hawthorne." He paused. "I am also initiating a formal investigation into Harlan Voss's acquisition of the 11 other properties in this territory. There may be additional parties with grounds for similar challenges." Augusta said nothing for a moment. "That is," she said finally, "thank you, Judge Hendricks." He gave her a look that was the nearest his dry face came to warmth. "Thank Mr. Cooper." He knew which records to pull. Then he signed the order and blotted it and handed it to Augusta, and that was that. Harlan Voss was arrested 3 weeks later in Prescott by federal marshals, based on Judge Hendricks' investigation combined with the testimony of 2 other landowners who came forward once word got out that a challenge was possible. Thomas Greer, Benjamin's former assistant, was discovered to have passed information to Voss's men on at least 3 separate occasions, and quietly left Silver Creek before the legal consequences caught up with him. The territorial investigation into Voss's wider land fraud scheme eventually implicated 7 additional officials and resulted in 4 criminal cases. Augusta read about all of it in the territorial newspaper over the following months, and each development felt like a piece of something being restored that had been broken for a very long time. But before any of that had fully played out, on the afternoon that Judge Hendricks rode back to Tucson on the stage, Augusta walked back to Benjamin Cooper's office on the main street of Silver Creek, and she went in without knocking, as had become her habit, and she set her hat down on his drafting table and she said, "I believe I mentioned that when this was over, we were going to have a conversation." He looked up from whatever he was working on, which appeared to be a perfectly ordinary property survey, and the expression on his face was the quietly helpless warmth that she had come to love very much. "You did mention that," he said. "I am in love with you," she said. She said it the way she did most things, directly, without decoration, having decided that the truth was better served plainly. "I realize that is something of an announcement rather than a conversation, but I have spent 3 months being more restrained than I am naturally inclined to be, and I find that I would rather just say it." Benjamin put down his pen. He stood up from behind the drafting table. He crossed to where she was standing, and he stood close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to look at him directly, and he looked at her for a moment with those pale gray eyes that she had spent weeks learning to read, and which were, at this moment, entirely unguarded. "I have been in love with you since you poured yourself a cup of my coffee without asking," he said. She laughed, and it came out brighter than she intended, and he smiled, and it was the first time she had seen him smile fully, without any of the usual buttoning up, and it changed his face into something that she understood in that moment she was going to want to keep seeing for a very long time. He kissed her, and she kissed him back, and the afternoon light came through the windows of the small survey office, and the town of Silver Creek went on about its business outside, and Augusta Hawthorne, who had ridden 60 miles on a stage from Tucson with a box of documents and a cold fury and a determination to recover what had been taken from her family, understood that she had recovered it, and more. Augusta returned to Prescott 3 weeks later, once the court order had been formally recorded and the Hawthorne deed restored. She rode with Benjamin, who had agreed to accompany her and who had also, quietly and practically, sold his Silver Creek survey business to a reliable former colleague and arranged for his equipment and records to be transferred. All of this done without consulting Augusta, but also without pretending it was anything other than what it was, which was a decision to be where she was going rather than where he had been. She appreciated the practicality. She told him so. "I would have consulted you," he said, as they rode north through the Arizona landscape, "but I thought you might argue about it on principle." "I absolutely would have argued about it on principle," she agreed. "But you would have won." He glanced at her sideways. "I did not know that." "You should have," she said. "You are very difficult to argue against when you are right." Her father was waiting for her at the ranch. The house was in a state of neglect, the fields unworked, the corrals empty, but the land itself was still there, still the land her grandfather had walked and her father had grown up on and she had ridden across for the first 20 years of her life. Edward Hawthorne was a thinner and grayer version of the man she remembered, and there was still the shame in his face that would probably never fully leave it. But he was also, when she handed him the restored deed and told him what had been done, a man who wept without embarrassment and held his daughter's hands and said he was sorry more times than she could count. She told him to stop being sorry and start being useful. She had a ranch to rebuild. Benjamin met Edward Hawthorne on the porch of the house on the day they arrived, and the meeting was brief and not without awkwardness, because Edward was a man who understood at a glance what Benjamin Cooper's presence meant, and felt the weight of being introduced to the man his daughter had found, and kept without any of the traditional formalities that fathers of daughters were theoretically supposed to be involved in. "You helped her," Edward said to Benjamin. "She handled most of it herself," Benjamin said. "I helped with the documents." Edward looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, with the specific gravity of a man making an assessment that he considered final. "Come inside," he said. "There is coffee if the stove is working." The stove was not working. Benjamin fixed it in 20 minutes, which Augusta observed from the kitchen doorway with an expression she did not entirely bother to conceal, and Edward observed this and cleared his throat and found something else to do in the other room. Spring on the ranch was work that did not wait for anyone's feelings to be sorted out. Augusta had learned the operation from the ground up, and she dove back into it with the energy of someone who had been away too long. She hired back 3 of the original ranch hands, men who had worked for the Hawthornes for years and had scattered reluctantly when the operation had been dismantled under Voss's ownership. She arranged to purchase a small starter herd from a rancher to the south who had surplus cattle. She worked out a plan with Benjamin for restoring the water rights and fencing that had fallen into disrepair. Benjamin, for his part, had established a small survey office in Prescott within 6 weeks of their return, and his reputation from the Voss case had preceded him in a way that brought him more work than he could initially manage. He was methodical and excellent, and his rates were fair, and the Territorial Land Office in Prescott, which had been more than a little shamed by the exposure of its role in facilitating Voss's fraud, was inclined to treat him with a great deal of cooperation. He and Augusta saw each other every day. She would ride into Prescott 3 times a week on ranch business and find reasons to have those errands route past the survey office, and he would come out to the ranch on Sunday afternoons with survey maps related to the land and any number of entirely reasonable professional pretexts that convinced exactly no one, least of all Edward Hawthorne, who had apparently decided that disapproval was more effort than he currently had the capacity for and had settled for a cautious, tentative warmth toward Benjamin that grew steadily throughout the spring. Benjamin asked Augusta to marry him in May, on a Sunday afternoon, on the north fence line of the Hawthorne property where they had ridden out to look at the boundary markers. The proposal was, characteristically, not particularly decorated. He said that he wanted to share his life with her, and that he believed she was the finest and most formidable person he had ever encountered, and that he thought, if she was willing, they could build something together worth having. Augusta sat on her horse and looked at him for a moment. "You should know that I am not planning to give up the ranch management," she said. "This is my family's land and I intend to run it myself." "I know that," he said. and I am not planning to defer to your judgment on matters where I have equivalent or superior expertise. I know that too, he said. I do not want you to. And you would need to live here at least most of the time. Your survey work can be done from Prescott, but your home would be here. I know, he said. That is what I am proposing. She looked at him across the fence line in the afternoon sunlight. This lean, quiet man with ink-stained hands and pale gray eyes who had stayed up with her all night over lamplight documents, and ridden into a trap in a saloon with a gun on his chest, and sold his business without drama to be where she was going. And she thought about trust, and about how she had spent a very large part of her life in a place where she had needed to be strong and solitary, and had learned to be both. And how those were good things, but they were better with company. Yes, she said. Obviously yes, he smiled. She had been collecting those full, genuine smiles of his like things of value since the first time she had seen one, and this one was worth more than any of the others. He reached across from his horse and she leaned out from hers, and they kissed over the fence line with the Arizona sky enormous above them and the ranch land stretching out in every direction, and it was, Augusta thought, a very suitable place to say yes. On the land, on the boundary, on the beginning of a new set of terms. They were married in September of 1879, in a small ceremony in Prescott. Augusta wore a dress the color of warm cream with embroidery at the cuffs that she had made herself over the preceding 2 months, because she was perfectly capable of making her own wedding dress and had not required assistance, though she had accepted Mrs. Parsons' company and conversation during the process, as Mrs. Parson had come up from Silver Creek for the occasion and brought enough practical advice and cheerful commentary to make the whole project considerably more enjoyable. Edward Hawthorne, who was sober and present and had spent the summer making slow but genuine progress on repairing himself, walked his daughter to the minister with an expression that was part shame and part gratitude and entirely love. Benjamin Cooper, who was not a man who showed emotion without meaning it, looked at Augusta throughout the entire ceremony with an intensity that was not performing anything, not performing adoration or happiness or certainty, simply experiencing all three in the very clear and legible way of a person who has made a decision and has no reservations about it. He said his vows in his direct, unhurried manner, as if they were facts being stated, which Augusta found far more moving than any amount of flowery language would have been. She said hers in the same way. The minister looked mildly surprised, as if he had expected more ornamentation, but the people who knew them were not surprised at all. The winter of 1879 into 1880 was a working winter. Augusta managed the ranch with the methodical aggression of someone reclaiming something precious, and the herd she had purchased in spring had grown through the summer, and she made decisions about the operation that were sometimes different from the decisions her father had made and sometimes the same. And Edward, who was slowly finding his footing again, watched her work and occasionally offered opinions, and accepted it with a quiet dignity when she did not take them. This dynamic settled into something functional and even warm over the months, and Benjamin, who moved through the ranch household with the same practical steadiness he brought to everything, became someone Edward Hawthorne relied on in ways neither of them spoke about directly but which were clear to anyone watching. In February of 1880, Augusta discovered she was expecting a child. She told Benjamin on a cold evening in their room, sitting on the edge of the bed with a lamp between them, and she told him the way she told him things, without drama but with complete attention. He was quiet for a moment in the particular Benjamin Cooper way that meant he was feeling something profound and was processing how to be present for it. Then he reached out and took both her hands in his and held them, and he said, "I am very glad." "So am I," she said. And she was, genuinely and without reservation, in a way she had not been entirely certain she would be until the moment she was. The pregnancy was not easy, particularly in the first months, and Augusta, who was not someone who accepted limitations gracefully, found the physical constraints genuinely frustrating. Benjamin managed this with a combination of practical support and the willingness to simply absorb her frustration without trying to argue her out of it, which was, she reflected, one of the most useful things a person could do for her. He took on more of the records and communication work for the ranch without being asked, and he did it without making a performance of the sacrifice, which meant she could accept the help without feeling managed. Their son was born in October of 1880. They named him James Edward Cooper, the James for the assessor James Whitmore, whose original honest report had been the key to everything, and the Edward for her father, who had, by that point, completed enough of his recovery to be genuinely present for the occasion in ways that mattered. Edward Hawthorne held his grandson with a careful reverence that made Augusta look away for a moment to collect herself. Benjamin held his son with an expression she had never seen on his face before and did not have a word for, something beyond the contained warmth she knew so well, something opened all the way up, unguarded and extraordinary. "He is very small," Benjamin said. "He is a perfectly ordinary size for a newborn," Augusta said. "He is very small," Benjamin said again, in a tone that made the statement not a complaint but a wonder. James Edward Cooper grew through the winter into spring with the particular determination of someone who had apparently decided to do everything as fast as possible, which Augusta found both charming and exhausting. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's forceful opinions, which manifested early as a strong preference for being upright and moving rather than lying still, which meant that the Cooper household rarely lacked for activity. Augusta's father, watching his grandson discover the porch steps for the first time with the absolute focus of a tiny person who has identified a goal and intends to achieve it, laughed. It was the first time Augusta had heard her father laugh in a very long time. It was a good sound. The ranch grew. By 1882, Augusta had expanded the herd substantially and had taken on 4 permanent ranch hands and negotiated a contract to supply beef to a military post 60 miles south that provided a reliable income stream. Benjamin's survey business had grown to the point where he had taken on a junior partner, a young man from Tucson named Alvarez who was meticulous and quick, and who Benjamin described to Augusta with the particular quiet satisfaction of someone who had found a person worth teaching. They rode the ranch land together on Sunday mornings when the week allowed it, the two of them, and sometimes James in the saddle in front of his mother or father, the Arizona landscape doing its slow, spectacular seasonal changes around them, the light on the mountains in the morning like something from a painting. Augusta had a habit on these rides of stopping at the north fence line where Benjamin had proposed to her. It was not a sentimental habit exactly. It was more that the place had a meaning she liked to return to, the boundary of the land her family had fought for, the place where she had said yes to a life she had not planned. "What are you thinking about?" Benjamin asked her one Sunday morning, pulled up beside her at the fence, the March light still sharp and clean. "The day we found the document in the way station," she said. He waited. "I was thinking about how certain I was that everything depended on that one piece of paper, and it did, in the legal sense. But looking back, the thing that actually made the difference was that there was someone standing in that lamplight with me." She looked at him. "I want you to know that I know that. I am not a person who says things like that with any regularity, but I know it, and I want you to know I know it." Benjamin Cooper looked at his wife in the morning light with the expression that was no longer new to her, but that she had never fully gotten used to, the complete and unperforming attention of him, the way he looked at her as if she was the most significant piece of data the world had ever produced. "I know you know it," he said. "That is one of the things I love about you. You know things and you remember them. You do not need to be told twice. That is an unusual compliment," she said. "You are an unusual person," he said. She considered this. "I will accept that." He leaned over from his horse and she met him halfway, as she had the first time, and they kissed in the March sunlight with the ranch land around them and the sound of James somewhere behind them, demanding attention from the ranch hand who had come along to manage exactly this situation. By 1883, Augusta was expecting their second child. This pregnancy was easier than the first, which she attributed to knowing what to expect and to being in better physical condition generally, having spent the intervening years doing the work of an active ranch. She was also, this time, more willing to accept the slowing down that the later months required, partly because James was now 2.5 years old, and the slowing down was relative in any case, since managing a 2-year-old with opinions constituted vigorous activity by any standard. Their second son was born in January of 1884, in the same room where James had been born, with the same practical efficiency that Augusta brought to everything. They named him Thomas William Cooper, the Thomas being a name they chose because they liked it, and the William for a friend of Benjamin's who had died young and was worth remembering. James met his brother with the cautious interest of a child who has been told something wonderful is happening and is reserving judgment until the evidence is in. The evidence, in his view, was apparently sufficient within approximately 2 days, after which he became fiercely attached to Thomas in the way of older siblings who have decided that a younger sibling is theirs. The Hawthorne-Cooper household in the spring of 1884 was a loud and working and full of life kind of household, the kind that accumulates boots by the door and maps on the table and small handprints in unexpected places and arguments that resolve into laughter and meals that run long because there is always more to say. Edward Hawthorne, who was well now, not in the complicated way of being barely managing, but genuinely, substantively well in the way of a man who had found his footing again after a fall, was present in all of it. He helped with the ranch in the ways his age and health allowed. He taught James to identify the constellations from the porch on clear nights. He sat with Thomas in the rocking chair and sang songs that Augusta did not remember him singing when she was small, but that she suspected had always been there, waiting. One evening in April, Augusta and Benjamin sat on the porch after the boys were asleep, in the quiet that a house with young children acquires late in the evening when everyone has finally relented to sleep. The air had that particular spring softness that comes to Arizona when winter has truly let go, and the stars were out in the brilliant territorial abundance that still, after years of living under them, struck Augusta as extraordinary. Benjamin said, "I received a letter today." She looked at him. "From whom?" "Judge Hendricks. He is retiring this summer. He wrote to say that the final case against Voss has concluded, all the criminal proceedings. Voss received a sentence of 7 years. He paused. The 11 properties he acquired fraudulently have all been returned to their original owners or their heirs through the process the investigation established. Augusta looked at the stars for a moment. 7 years was not long enough by her private accounting, but the properties returned was something. 11 families. 11 pieces of land that were back with the people they belonged to. He also wrote, Benjamin continued, to say that the documentary record established in the Hawthorne case has been used as a template for a new territorial regulation requiring independent assessment verification in all land transactions involving loans above a certain amount. Augusta turned to look at him. "That is because of our case." "He says so, yes." She thought about that for a moment. About the day she had arrived in Silver Creek on the stage from Tucson with a box of documents and a cold fury, thinking only about the immediate problem of her family's stolen land, not imagining for a moment that what she had uncovered would become the basis for a rule that would protect other families she would never meet. "Your grandfather would have liked knowing that," Benjamin said. "He would have," she agreed. She reached over and took his hand, and he laced his fingers through hers with the easy habit of years, and they sat on the porch of the Hawthorne ranch in the April night and let the quiet be quiet around them. Augusta thought about the night in the Silver Creek saloon, the gun against Benjamin's chest, and her own voice, steadier than she felt, telling Harlan Voss it was over. She thought about the lamplight in the way station and the document in her hands. She thought about her father's face when she gave him back the deed. She thought about the north fence line in the October light. She thought about James's gray eyes and Thomas's loud, unreserved laugh in Benjamin's hands, always slightly ink-stained, always steady. She thought about what it meant to build a life that was yours, not given to you but made through the application of stubbornness and evidence and the willingness to find in a small survey office in Silver Creek a person worth trusting. "Are you happy?" Benjamin asked. Not with anxiety, not requiring reassurance, simply the way he asked things cleanly. "Enormously," she said. And it was true in the way that the best truths are, simple and without qualification, and arrived at through everything that had come before it. In the fall of that same year, Augusta received a letter from a woman in the town of Oro Valley whose family had been one of the 11 whose land Voss had defrauded. The woman's name was Maria Salazar. She wrote to say that she had heard the story of the Hawthorne case and wanted to thank Augusta for being the person who had started the chain of events that returned her family's property to them. She wrote that it had meant everything. Augusta read the letter twice and then sat with it for a while. She wrote back. She told Maria that the credit belonged partly to a man named Benjamin Cooper, who had known which documents to pull, and had been willing to stand beside her when the standing became dangerous. She told Maria that she was glad the land was restored. She told her that she hoped her family's land would grow and thrive. She folded the letter and addressed it and gave it to the Prescott Postal Service. And then she went back into the house, where James was demanding to be taught something about horses, and Thomas was making his feelings about the current state of his biscuit known at considerable volume, and Benjamin was at the kitchen table working on a survey map with the focused concentration of a man who had found his work and his life in the same place, and considered himself, quietly and entirely, fortunate. Augusta paused in the kitchen doorway and looked at all of it. Benjamin looked up. He saw her expression, and something in his face settled into the warmth she loved best. "Come in," he said. "James is trying to tell Thomas about horses, and it is not going well." "I heard," she said. She came in. She sat down beside him at the table. She picked up a pencil from the pile of his materials and made an annotation on the edge of his map that he would definitely notice, and that would definitely start an argument about property boundaries that would resolve, as most of their arguments did, into something much better than an argument. Outside, the Arizona fall was doing its slow gold work on the land that the Hawthornes had held and lost and fought back for, and would hold now, generation by generation, into a future that was still wide open and not yet written. In the survey office in Prescott, on a shelf above Benjamin's filing cabinet, sat a framed copy of the original Hawthorne property assessment signed by James Whitmore in 1874. The document that had been buried and recovered and had changed everything. Augusta had put it there when Benjamin moved his office, and he had left it there because he understood what it meant to both of them, not just the legal victory it represented, but the whole arc of the thing, the trust and the danger and the lamplight and the long road from Silver Creek to here. Every person who came into the office to have their land surveyed or their boundaries confirmed or their records set straight saw it there on the shelf, and occasionally someone asked about it. When they did, Benjamin told the story plainly and accurately, giving Augusta the credit that was hers. And Augusta, when she was there, told the part about the documents and said that Benjamin had done the hard technical work and that it had been a joint enterprise from the beginning. They agreed on this version of events, as they agreed on most things, because they had built their understanding of each other on evidence and honesty and the direct, unadorned acknowledgement of what was true, and those were habits that served a life together even better than they had served a legal case. James grew into a boy who was his mother's child in his determination and his father's in his patience, which made him, his grandfather Edward noted one Sunday afternoon, somewhat formidably balanced. He learned to ride and to read accounts and to identify survey markers and to bake bread, this last skill acquired from Mrs. Parson during one of her visits and developed with the same intensity he applied to everything, which meant that by the time he was 8 the household bread situation was primarily in his management, and everyone was better off for it. Thomas grew into a child who was loud and affectionate and physically fearless, and who could not pass a fence without climbing it or a creek without getting in it or a dog without making friends with it, and who regarded the world as a place that had been specifically designed for his enjoyment and engagement. Benjamin, watching Thomas negotiate with a particularly stubborn calf one afternoon with a combination of absolute patience and complete determination, said to Augusta, "He got that from you. He got that from both of us," she said. "He got the determination from you and the patience from me," he said. "The combination is going to be remarkable." "Or exhausting," she said. "Those are the same thing," he said. Augusta Hawthorne Cooper, who had left a broken ranch in Prescott on a stage to Silver Creek in March of 1879, with a box of documents and a determination that had not yet found its direction, who had found that direction in a small survey office lit by afternoon light and strong coffee, who had stood in the doorway of a saloon with a gun on the man she loved, and made the choice that she was not leaving without him, who had rebuilt her family's land and her family's name and her family's future and found, in the process, a life that was more than she had planned for and entirely her own, stood on the porch of the Hawthorne Ranch in the October of 1884 and looked out at the land and knew that the story was not over. It was, in fact, just fully, well, and properly begun. Benjamin came to stand beside her, as he had stood beside her in survey offices and saloons and courts of law and fence lines, and all the ordinary and extraordinary places that a life moves through, and he put his arm around her and she leaned into him, and the land stretched out before them golden and enormous in the fall afternoon light. "What are you thinking?" he asked, as he always asked on these still moments, genuinely wanting to know. "I am thinking," she said, "that I would like to add another pasture on the east side next spring. The water from the creek runs in that direction and the grass has been better this year." He was quiet for a moment. "I am also thinking," she said, "that I am so glad I went to Silver Creek." He pressed a kiss to her temple, unhurried and certain, the way he did everything. "So am I," he said, "every single day." Inside the house, James was teaching Thomas a song that Edward had taught him, something old and slightly off-key that neither boy was performing with any accuracy, but both were performing with absolute commitment, the sound of it carrying out through the open door into the evening air, loud and cheerful and entirely alive. Augusta Cooper listened to her son singing in the house her grandfather had built on the land her family had fought to keep, with her husband beside her, and the Arizona sky going its brilliant sunset colors above the mountains in the west, and she let herself have the fullness of it without qualification or reserve, because she had learned, through some considerable effort and some significant danger, and one very important decision made in the doorway of a saloon, that the things worth having were worth having completely. The stars came out, one by one, as they always did over the Hawthorne land. The Cooper family, which had not existed 4 years ago and which would go on into the territory's future with its accounts balanced, and its survey maps precise, and its pastures expanding, and its bread excellent, and its arguments affectionate, and its love the kind that is built from trust and honesty, and the willingness to stand, without armor, in the lamplight, stayed on the porch until the cold came in, and then went inside together into the warmth.